Accordingly, if human beings are regarded as beings whose existence is a punishment and an atonement, then they are already seen in a more correct light. The myth of the fall, although probably like the whole of Judaism borrowed from the Zend-Avesta Bundahism, is the only thing in the Old Testament to which I can concede a metaphysical, although only allegorical, truth. Indeed, it is this alone that reconciles me to the Old Testament. Thus, our existence resembles nothing but the consequence of a false step and a guilty desire. New Testament Christianity, the ethical spirit of which is that of Brahmanism and Buddhism, and which is therefore very foreign to the otherwise optimistic spirit of the Old Testament, has also, extremely wisely, started from that very myth. In fact, without this, it would not have found one single point of connection with Judaism. If we wish to measure the degree of guilt with which our existence itself is burdened, let us look at the suffering connected with it. Every great pain, whether bodily or mental, states what we deserve, for it could not come to us if we did not deserve it. That Christianity also looks at our existence in this light is proved by a passage from Luther's Commentary on Galatians, chapter 3. In our bodies and circumstance, however, we are all subject to the devil, and are strangers in this world, of which he is prince and lord. Hence, everything is under his rule: the bread we eat, the beverages we drink, the clothes we use, even the air and everything by which we live in the flesh. An outcry has been raised about the melancholy and cheerless nature of my philosophy. But this is to be found merely in the fact that, instead of inventing a future hell as the equivalent of sins, I have shown that where guilt is to be found, there is already in the world something akin to hell. But the person who is inclined to deny this can easily experience it. This world is the battleground of tormented and agonized beings who continue to exist only by each devouring the other. Therefore, every beast of prey in it is the living grave of thousands of others, and its self-maintenance is a chain of torturing deaths. Then, in this world, the capacity to feel pain increases with knowledge, and therefore reaches its highest degree in human beings, a degree that is the higher, the more intelligent the person. To this world, the attempt has been made to adapt the system of optimism, and to demonstrate to us that it is the best of all possible worlds. The absurdity is glaring. However, an optimist tells me to open my eyes and look at the world and see how beautiful it is in the sunshine, with its mountains, valleys, rivers, plants, animals, and so on. But is the world, then, a peep show? These things are certainly beautiful to behold, but to be them is something quite different. A teleologist then comes along and speaks to me in glowing terms about the wise arrangement by virtue of which care is taken that the planets do not run their heads against one another, that land and sea are not mixed up into pulp, but are held apart in a delightful way. Also that everything is neither rigid in continual frost nor roasted with heat. Likewise, that, in consequence of the obliquity of the ecliptic, there is not an eternal spring in which nothing could reach maturity, and so forth. But this, and everything like it, are indeed mere necessary conditions. If there is to be a world at all, if its planets are to exist at least as long as is needed for the ray of light from a remote fixed star to reach them, and are not, like Lessing's sun, to depart again immediately after birth, then of course it could not be constructed so unskillfully that its very framework would threaten to collapse. But if we proceed to the results of the applauded work, if we consider the players who act on the stage so durably constructed, and then see how, with sensibility, pain makes its appearance, and increases in proportion as that sensibility develops into intelligence, and then how, keeping pace with this, desire and suffering come out ever more strongly, and increase, till at last human life affords no other material than that for tragedies and comedies, then whoever is not a hypocrite will hardly be disposed to break out into hallelujahs. The real but disguised origin of these latter has moreover been exposed mercilessly, but with triumphant truth, by David Hume in his Natural History of Religion, in sections 6, 7, 8, and 13. He also explains without reserve in the 10th and 11th book of his Dialogues on Natural Religion, with arguments very convincing yet quite different from mine, the miserable nature of this world and the untenableness of all optimism. Here, at the same time, he attacks optimism at its source. Both these works of Hume's are as well worth reading as they are at present time unknown in Germany, where, on the other hand, incredible pleasure is found patriotically in the most repulsive drivel of native, boastful mediocrities who are lauded to the skies as great individuals. Nevertheless, Hamann translated those dialogues. Kant looked through the translation and late in life wished to induce Hamann's son to publish them because the translation by Plattner did not satisfy him. See Kant's biography by F.W. Schubert, page 81 and 165. There is more to be learned from each page of David Hume than from the collected philosophical works of Hegel, Herbart, and Schleiermacher taken together. Again, the founder of systematic optimism, Leibniz, whose services to philosophy I have no wish to deny, although I could never succeed in really thinking myself into the monadology, pre-established harmony, and the identity of indiscernibles. His new essays on the understanding are, however, merely an excerpt with a detailed yet weak criticism, with a view to correction of Locke's work that is justly world-famous. Here, he opposes Locke with just as little success as he opposes Newton in his essay on the causes of celestial motion, directed against the system of gravitation. The Critique of Pure Reason is very specially directed against this Leibniz-Wolffian philosophy and has a polemical, indeed a destructive relation to it. Just as to Locke and Hume, it has a relation of continuation and of further development. But the professors of philosophy are everywhere engaged at the present time in setting Leibniz on his feet again with this humbug, in fact, in glorifying him, and on the other hand, in disparaging and setting aside Kant as much as possible, has its good reason in the saying, "First live." The Critique of Pure Reason does not permit of one's giving out Jewish mythology as philosophy, or speaking summarily of the soul as a given reality, as a well-known and well-accredited person, without giving some account of how one has arrived at this concept, and what justification one has for using it scientifically. But first live, then philosophize. Down with Kant. Long live Leibniz. Therefore, to return to Leibniz, I cannot assign to the Theosophy that methodical and broad development of optimism in such a capacity any other merit than that it later gave rise to the immortal Candide of the great Voltaire. In this way, of course, Leibniz's oft-repeated and lame excuse for the evil of the world, namely that the bad sometimes produces the good, obtained proof that for him was unexpected. Even by the name of his hero, Voltaire, indicated that it needed only sincerity to recognize the opposite of optimism. Actually, optimism cuts so strange a figure on this scene of sin, suffering, and death that we should be forced to regard it as irony if we did not have an adequate explanation of its origin and its secret source, namely hypocritical flattery with an offensive confidence in its success, a source so delightfully disclosed by Hume as previously mentioned. But against the palpably sophistical proofs of Leibniz that this is the best of all possible worlds, may even oppose seriously in honesty the proof that it is the worst of all possible worlds. For possible means not what we may picture in our imagination, but what can actually exist and last. Now, this world is arranged as it had to be if it were to be capable of continuing with great difficulty to exist. If it were a little worse, it would be no longer capable of continuing to exist. Consequently, since a worse world could not continue to exist, it is absolutely impossible, and so this world itself is the worst of all possible worlds. For not only if the planets ran their heads against one another, but also, if any one of the actually occurring perturbations of their course continued to increase, instead of being gradually balanced again by the others, the world would soon come to an end. Astronomers know on what accidental circumstances, in most cases on the irrational relation to one another of the periods of revolution, all this depends. They have carefully calculated that it will always go on well, and consequently that the world can also last and go on. Although Newton was of the opposite opinion, we will hope that the astronomers have not miscalculated, and consequently that the mechanical perpetual motion realized in such a planetary system will also not, like the rest, ultimately come to a standstill. Again, powerful forces of nature dwell under the firm crust of the planet. As soon as some accident affords these free play, they must necessarily destroy that crust with everything living on it. This has occurred at least 3 times on our planet, and will probably occur even more frequently. The earthquake of Lisbon, of Haiti, the destruction of Pompeii are only small, playful hints at the possibility. An insignificant alteration of the atmosphere, not even chemically demonstrable, causes cholera, yellow fever, black death, and so on, which carry off millions of people. A somewhat greater alteration would extinguish all life. A very moderate increase of heat would dry up all rivers and springs. The animals have received barely enough in the way of organs and strength to enable them with the greatest exertion to procure sustenance for their own lives and food for their offspring. Therefore, if an animal loses a limb, or even only the complete use of it, it is in most cases bound to perish. Powerful as are the weapons of understanding and reason possessed by the human race, 9/10 of humanity live in constant conflict with want, always balancing themselves with difficulty and effort on the brink of destruction. Thus, throughout, for the continuance of the whole as well as that of every individual being, the conditions are sparingly and scantily given, and nothing beyond these. Therefore, the individual life is a ceaseless struggle for existence itself, while at every step it is threatened with destruction. Just because this threat is so often carried out, provision had to be made, by the incredibly great surplus of seed, that the destruction of individuals should not bring about that of the races, since about these alone is nature seriously concerned. Consequently, the world is as bad as it can possibly be, if it is to exist at all. QED. The fossils of entirely different kinds of animal species which formerly inhabited the planet afford us, as proof of our calculation, records of worlds whose continuance was no longer possible, and which were in consequence somewhat worse than the worst of possible worlds.